timeline of things and how it lays out, and how it lays out according to Scripture, because we see the things that take place in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But it feels like we have separated a little bit too much from what's spoken of in Exodus, and Deuteronomy, and Numbers. And so we want to make sure, and Leviticus, we want to make sure that we understand those things that were spoken were a shadow of things to come. That schoolmaster trained us and prepared us for the Passover, for the Messiah's coming and his work that he would do. So, we're going to do a lot of scripture, hopping, we'll say. We'll go through and between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then we'll take some time to go back into the original covenant to understand a few things. So the main objective is to really track Yeshua's last days leading up to Golgotha, in that time where he gave his life for us. Amen. 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 So let us begin. All right. So let's begin with first looking at John chapter 11, verse 55. John chapter 11, verse 55. So let me get there. I'm going to try to keep them up here on the screen for you as well. So John chapter 11, verse 55. We're going to be looking for time markers. We're going to be looking for these time markers. And so John chapter 11, verse 55, it says, "Now the Pesach of the Yehudim was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Pesach to set themselves apart." And so we know what was drawing near? The Pesach. Pesach was drawing near. Now let's go over to chapter 12. Chapter 12, verse 1. Chapter 12, verse 1. And it says, accordingly, Yahshua, 6 days before the Pesach, came to Bethaniah, where Eleazar was, who had died, whom he raised from the dead. Eleazar was there. This is the Eleazar that he said, "Come forth from the grave." He commanded the death clothes to release this Eleazar. He called him back to life. And this time frame that we're marking now is 6 days before Pesach. So what we read in 11 and 55, it just told us that we was near. People were starting to get their travel plans together. Now we're being told that Yahshua, 6 days before Pesach, came to Bethaniah. So now we know where he was. All right, so now let's go forward just a little bit. So we're 6 days before. We're going to keep tracking. Let's go to Matthew. Let's go to Matthew, and we're going to go to Matthew chapter 26. We're going to keep walking. Verse 2. Matthew chapter 26, verse 2. And it says, "You know that after 2 days the Pesach takes place, and the son of Adam is to be delivered up to be impaled." So we started out when he got to Bethaniah. How much time was it until Passover? It was 6 days until Passover. Now it says We are now 2 days before. Okay? We are now 2 days before. And I want to read a couple of these verses so you know what's happening now. And verse 3 says, "Then the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people came together at the court of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to seize Yahshua by trickery and kill him." All right, so this was their plot. Their plot was to seize him and to kill him. But they didn't want to do it all out in the open. So make note of that. They didn't want to do it out in the open. They wanted this thing to be done kind of in the dark. They wanted it to be done in the dark. So let's look at Mark 14. I told y'all we're going to jump around a decent amount. Mark chapter 14, verse 1. And it's going to give us a little something extra that we're going to need. All right, it's confirming something for us, and then it's going to give us a little something extra. So Mark 14:1 says, "Now the Pesach and the festival of Matzot was after 2 days, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to take him through treachery and put him to death." Now, what is different about what it says in Mark was happening in 2 days and what it says in Matthew was happening in 2 days? It added something. This time it didn't just say that there was Passover or Pesach. It also said Pesach and the festival of Matzot, or unleavened bread. And it said it together, and it said was after 2 days. Right? Make note of that. It was after 2 days. These two things. So one thing we have to begin to understand. Matter of fact, first let's go to Luke 22. Let's go there first, and then I'll explain. Luke chapter 22. Luke chapter 22, verse 1. And it says, "And the festival of Matzot drew near, which is called Pesach." It reversed it, right? Because before it said the Pesach was near, and then it said the Pesach and unleavened bread. Now it's saying unleavened bread, which is called Pesach. So the thing that we have to establish and remember and note is that very often Passover, unleavened bread are used interchangeably. Sometimes it's spoken of the entire festival as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It includes Passover. But then sometimes it speaks of Passover as the entire time, from Passover through the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And then there are other times where it divides it according to what we see in Exodus, which is Passover's on the 14th, unleavened bread begins on the 15th and lasts 7 days. Right? So we kind of see both things being used at different times. So it's important to note that as we go through and take note of the timeline. And so now let's move forward just a little bit. And now we're going to start getting to when the feast began. So this was 2 days. But let's jump down since we're still in Luke. Stay right there for a quick second. Let's just pop down to verse 7. And verse 7 says, And the day of unleavened bread came when the Pesach had to be slaughtered. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought y'all was seeing what I'm seeing. It ain't working like that, huh? Let me in there. All right, and then, all right, so now y'all can see what I'm seeing. Now it's small. Yeah, it got real small in there. All right, well, y'all gonna have to pull these scriptures up. Because I can't make it no bigger for some reason. So, but, matter of fact, let me do this then, since I can't make it no bigger. All right. I'll pop something up there when I need to, but for some reason it is making it very small when I switch it over. I'll see if I can fix that as I go. All right, so so now we jump down. We're at chapter 22, Luke chapter 22, verse 7 now. And the day of unleavened bread came when the Pesach had to be slaughtered. Put a pin there. What day came? Day of unleavened bread came. When what? When the Pesach had to be slaughtered. So there was a sort of a clue into where we are, but yet again, we've already established that there are times when unleavened bread is used to describe the entire feast time. But then he pointed to a specific time within this feast time. And he says, the day of unleavened bread came when we had to slaughter the Pesach. All right, so let's now go down to, let's see, Matthew. Let's go back to Matthew 26. Let's go back to Matthew 26. And we are going to be looking at now a little bit further down at verse 17. And by the way, this is the time frame when Yahshua's feet were anointed with by Miriam with the oil from the alabaster box. He says, "She has anointed me unto my death." All right, so now verse 17, Matthew chapter 26, verse 17 says, "And on the first day of unleavened bread, the taught ones came to Yahshua, saying to him, 'Where do you wish us to prepare for you to eat the Pesach?'" Where do you wish for us to prepare to eat the Pesach? So now this is a little bit different. So now let's look at Luke, because Luke is going to give us a little bit of extra detail that we need. And so Luke chapter 22, verse 7, in telling us, so Matthew told us they're going to prepare to eat the Passover. But Luke makes a distinction. So we read verse 7, now let's read verse 8. "And he sent Kepha and Yohanan, saying, 'Go and prepare the Pesach for us to what? To eat.'" So there were two different things. There was the slaughtering of the Pesach, and then there was the eating of the Pesach. These things had to take place at two different times. Now, we sometimes look at things because we're reading. And when you read, you can read tons and tons of time spans in a single sentence and paragraph. You done covered 3, 4, 5 days, a week, a month. And so sometimes our brain just makes all this stuff run together. And so it's good to understand how this actually takes place. Let's put it into reality. Let's put it into today. So if there's a time for us to eat Passover, and we've got to slaughter a lamb in order to have it for the Passover, it's impossible to slaughter a lamb and to eat the lamb all at the same time, because it's got to be cooked. It's got to be slaughtered first. And then it's got to be, and slaughtering doesn't just mean killing the animal. That means killing the animal, draining the blood, skinning the animal, separating the animal. That now separating the skin, that in and of itself is a task. And so then you roast the animal. So they did these things in a particular order. All right, so now let's go on. So the Pesach lamb, they were to eat, had to be slaughtered. And so we know that it says the 2 days leading up, the day of, the first day coming into unleavened bread, when the Pesach had to be slaughtered. So let's now go back, because Yahshua's with them, right? And so let's back all the way up. First, let's begin with the original account in Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. There are some things in here we're going to really hope we can bring to light and shed some light on, because there's just a lot of confusion around it. Exodus chapter 12. And we are at verse 3. That's the first thing we'll do. All right, so this is the original account. Okay, so this is when the children of Israel were coming out of Mitzrayim. Passover is a remembrance, right? It's a remembrance of this, okay? So we're going to when the actual historical event took place. So the first thing you see in verse 3, it says, "Speak to all the children of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this new moon," he's already established that this is the beginning of new moons. So on the 10th day of this new moon, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. So that was to happen on the 10th day, right? Ahead of time, you have to choose the lamb. Now, let's jump down. Let's jump down to verse 6. And it says, "And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same new moon. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall slay it between the evenings." Now, get it on the 10th day. But when does the slaughtering take place? The 14th day. What did we read in Matthew? It was the first day of unleavened bread when the Pesach had to be slaughtered. So it's referring back to this command. This command said on the 14th day, and it says, and here's something that I want to dive a little bit deeper into, because this phrasing can be confusing. It says, "slay it between the evenings." Now, that is the interpretation of the translation of the Bible, the scriptures. The translation of the Bible according to, let's say, for example, let's first start out with King James. King James chapter 12, verse 6 says, "Kill it in the evening." Okay? If we look at another version, the JPS says, verse 6, "Kill it at dusk." if we look at the, if we look at the Sefer translation, it says, kill it in the evening. If we look at the words themselves as it appears, and this is, I'll try to get this up here. It's just so small. Good gracious. Let's see. And I'm like, ain't no, where's the make it bigger button? Yeah, there is no resizing. Good gracious. Let's see. Let me make sure I'm not missing nothing. No. I don't see no make it bigger button. I done tried that. Oh, here we go. Look. Maybe that'll help. Let's see. There we go. Is that big enough? Yeah, maybe that's why the pinch to zoom wasn't working. You got to go to the preferences. All right. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. All right, now, that should be plenty big, right? All right, so verse 6, what I've noticed, see, y'all learning Hebrew, this good. Good, right here. What I noticed is if you go to that word at evening, or in the evening is what we see, you will notice something. So you read from right to left. So this word right here is the word where it is at, or the scriptures translates it to between. Okay? All right, so we have between, and then down here, that's H996. H996. At evening. But then, that's the at. That word is Baim. And let me go ahead and pull it up. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. Get to it. Okay. Between, among, in the midst of. In the midst of. Baim. All right, so between, in the midst of. So that's one thing. In the midst of the evening. Now, evening is typically a rev. It's typically a rev, which is, let me show you the word first, which is ayin, resh, bait. That's typically the word, ayin, resh, bait. But you'll see, well, the ha is just saying the, so the evening, ha, rev. But when you then add on this piece right here, there's a yod and a mem. Y'all see that? Let me point it out, because I know it can get lost in all these letters. See that? The yod and the mem, that's a final mem. That makes it plural. So now it says between the evenings, or in the midst of the evenings, right? And so this can cause a lot of confusion. It can cause a lot of confusion. But then when you look at what this word means, it begins to help us to see. Because remember, every other translation that we've seen says at evening, in the evening, in the evening. But this, in the midst of, in the midst of may help us understand that between the evenings a little bit more. So when it says in the midst of, now if we said in the midst of the evening, evenings, this is going back. So now, because whenever you see a word spoken, one of the ways to get a better understanding for what that word means is look at it in the same context someplace else, right? You look at the same word in a different place where the context is similar, and it will give you kind of a bit more of the range of what that word could mean, right? And so here's another place. First time, and first mention is also another good way of dealing with that, where you go to the first time it's used. We're going to do both. It's used in the same context, and it's also the first time that it's mentioned. And that is actually Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. And let me pop over to English here. All right, so Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good. And Elohim separated the light from the darkness. So now if we look at this in all Hebrew, what we will see is that word again for being separated. That same word, and it pops up twice. And this is Elohim. This is Elohim. Bara. No, not bara. That's the word we just had. It's the word we just had. Ba'in. Yeah, I'm sorry. And so we've already looked at the definition of the word, so I ain't got to do that again. But this is the same word. Elohim separated. And so you see it again, separated. Separated. And so this would be the light, separated the light. Or, Haor. Haor, is that right? Yeah, or. With the hay on the beginning. So Elohim, Bain, separated, or that same word that was between or in the midst of, light, separated, darkness, hachoshek, for darkness. But what happens when the evening comes? You have a mixture of light and dark. And so in the midst of, we now look at it like this. When it's speaking of in between, it's like light in between dark, in between light, in between dark, in between light, in between dark, which is how you get not all light or not all dark, but we get even. We get dusk. That is exactly what it looks like. When you come out at dusk, it's not dark, it's not light. And then all of a sudden, the sun has already gone down, right? And it's not quite all the way dark yet. Within 10 minutes, it's dark. That's the separation. The dark and the light are separated by even. It's separated by even. So you have dark on one side, light on the other side. Now, what you understand is, so if we go back and we're already in Genesis, right? So let's stay there. And let's look at what happens at the end of a day. What happens at the end of the first day? What does he say? And the evening and the morning were the first day. So the words that are used there, let me make sure I'm highlighting the right thing. Verse 5. All right. So at the end of verse 5, let me find it. Yes, I'm in Genesis 1 right now. Because when it says the evening and the morning are the first day, so Yom is the word for day, Yom. But when it says morning, it says Boker, morning. When it says evening, it says Erev. The Erev is the one that comes where he said we ought to slaughter the Passover. So in other words, our language would say dusk and dawn. It says the dusk and dawn. That's what separates. So from dusk, you go to daylight. From daylight, you go to, no, I'm sorry. I'm saying it backwards, ain't I? From dawn, you go to daylight. And then from daylight, you go to dusk. From dusk, you go to night. You go to night. And so Yom is often used to describe the entire day. That would include both aspects, the dark side of it, the light side of it, all of it. But then when we speak of Erev, it is always leading into the night. Because Erev is the equivalent to what? Dusk or dawn? Dusk. Erev is always equivalent to dusk. Okay? So that's important to know. So let's go back and let me pull it up real quick. And let's do each word here. So Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. Because these two things are called two different things. All right. So the light he called day. And that is Strong's H3117. That's Yom. Okay? Yom. That's daylight. Or remember also the totality of the day. And the darkness he called night. This is Lail. This is H3915, Lail. So the day, again, Genesis chapter 1, verse 5, the day he called what? Yom. The night, the darkness he called what? Lail. That's why we say Laila Tov. Good night. So that's, yeah. So Lail is the word for night. But then look at the change that happened. He says, and the Erev and the Boker were the first Yom. So let's prove that out. The evening, 6153. H6153. And that word is what? Erev. So the Erev was first. And the Boker, so we say Boker Tov, good morning. H1242 is Boker. And the Erev and the Boker were the first Yom. So there's a completion of the entire cycle. Because Erev always leads into what? Yom, the daylight hours. I'm sorry. I keep saying this backwards. This me. I'm saying it backwards. Erev leads into the night hours, which is the dusk. Yeah. Which is dusk. It's dark. It's night. Right? And then the Boker always leads into what? That's the dawn of a new day. Dawn of a new day. So that leads into the Yom. And so, and this, I'm telling you, this is important because now let's go to, we have to get that to understand when he said to slaughter the lamb. And that's really why I'm taking a little bit of time to go through that. So let's now get back on to where we were. We're in, let's see, Exodus 12. We're at the original account. So we already read where he said in verse 6, between the evenings. So now hopefully a better understanding of that is in the midst of the even. In the midst of the even. So because you need time, and by the way, if you do a little bit of research and search it out, I did this before, and it was probably about at minimum a year ago. But I think it was the year before that. So I think it was really 2 years ago. So forgive me if I say anything incorrect, like down to the science. But if I remember correctly, it takes roughly about an hour or something like that to drain this animal, and maybe about 2 to 3 hours to cook. So you're not talking about something that takes like all day, like, this is a 12, 13 hours smoking a brisket or something like that. This is not that type situation. Open fire, roasting that lamb from slaughter to completely finished probably could have been done in about 5 or so hours. Okay? I think I'm remembering that correctly. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. I'm at least in the ballpark. I know I'm in the ballpark, but again, I haven't looked it up in a little bit. So, matter of fact, somebody fact check me on that. If it's an easy Google search, I had to put a few things together to come up with it. But let's now look at verse 8, Exodus chapter 12, verse 8, and it says, "And they shall eat the flesh on that night." Which night? That night. What night are we at? The 14th day of the same new moon. We're at the 14th day. So you have roasted it in fire, and you shall eat the flesh of that on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs, and they shall eat it. With unleavened bread and with bitter herbs, they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw. So it had to be cooked. 4 hours. So I was close. My memory does work sometimes. So my fact checker said I was in the ballpark. It takes about 4 hours from slaughter to dinner time. So again, it's not a super long time we're talking here. All right. So if that be the case, now you're gonna slaughter it in the night that you're gonna eat it. What else happened with the children of Israel? Let's look at verse 11. Because this is the real account, right? This is the actual historical account. And it says, "And this is how you eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Passover." What's the Passover? This lamb is the Passover. And this is how you ought to eat it. That night, it says you ought to eat it that night. It's already told us this is when you eat it, this night. As a matter of fact, verse 10 says don't leave anything until morning. So you know it wasn't anything taking place the next day. It was all in that night. I promise y'all this is going somewhere. I really might not get to the end of it, but we're gonna get far enough along for y'all to get a good stopping point before we move on. All right, so that's verse 11. That tells us something critical. We eat it that night, and it is the Passover of Yah. All right, now let's go to verse 17. Still in Exodus. Verse 17. And it says, and you shall guard the festival, what? Of Matzot. For on this same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Mitzrayim. And you shall guard this day throughout your generations in everlasting law. An everlasting law. So, again, we have this mashing together of Passover and Festival of Matzah. They are right on top of each other. Now, if we back up to verse 16, it says, and on the first day is a set-apart gathering. And on the seventh day, you shall have a set-apart gathering. All right, so if we read verse 18, it's going to reveal something for us. Verse 18 gives us a particular number of days. All right, so verse 18 says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the new moon. So what happens on the 14th day of the new moon in the evening? You slaughter that lamb, right? And then you shall eat it with unleavened bread. Now you're going to eat unleavened bread from the 14th day at evening until when? The 21st day at evening, right? And so what does he tell us to do on Passover? At the Pesach, we slaughter the lamb, right? And then he says, eat it with what? What two things? Yeah, okay, sorry, that's how we eat it, yes. But what were we to eat with it? It was two things he said, eat with it. Bitter herbs and unleavened bread. Bitter herbs and unleavened bread. So, on Pesach, have you eaten unleavened bread? Yes. Yes, because it says you are to eat the Passover, the Pesach, with unleavened bread and with bitter herb. Now, it says you are to eat 14 days, even though it speaks of a 14th, on the 14th day, sorry. Even though it speaks of a 7-day festival, it's adding on the beginning. You're going to eat unleavened bread there as well. So the 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. That's 8 days of eating unleavened bread. That's 8 days of eating unleavened bread. Now, let's go to verse 22. Verse 22 says, and you shall take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin and strike the lintel of the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. And none of you shall go out of the door of his house until morning. None of you can go out. You're inside. Stay inside at bare minimum, until daylight. Bare minimum. You cannot go out. Somebody want to verify that word? Exodus 12:22. Until morning. What's that word? Morning. Until morning. Until morning. What's that word? Boker. Let's verify it. Let's make sure. 12:22. So we're going to look at it. Let's grab the Hebrew text. Let's go to 12:22. Let's verify it. It's the last word. Somebody tell me what those 3 letters are. Bait. Kuf. Resh. There it is. What does that spell? Boker. Such as Boker Tov. So we're right? Let's verify it. Our Hebrew teacher's proud of us, y'all. Look at that. So look at that. It's Boker. It's Boker. So that's saying, do it when? In the Erev And do not come out of your houses at minimum until when? Boker. That means you're in your house all during the night. What's that? Lael, right? All right. So he told them, don't come out. Don't come out. So there's no way they came out right then. All right, so let's keep going. Let's jump down to 35. This blessed me, y'all. When I put this together, I was like, wow, man. All right, so in the children of Israel, verse 35, still in Exodus 12, and the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moshe, and they had asked from the Mitzrites objects of silver and objects of gold and garments. Now, what did it say the children of Israel did? What was the first thing it said they did? They did according to the word of Moshe. A part of that being slay the lamb, roast it, eat it in haste. Don't come out of your house until Boker at minimum, right? So one of the areas that came up even this year was like, okay, so what, how did they plunder? How did they ask if they couldn't go out? So now let's go over to the book of Yahshua. Let's go over to the book of Yahshua. I'll pull it up on here in case you don't have it. All right. Here we go again with the little writing, huh? Now, I thought for sure this will let me make it bigger. This ain't letting me make it bigger. Okay. Let's see. All right, I'm going to just read it because it ain't letting me make it bigger. So, it reads, Book of Yahshua, chapter 80. Sorry, I didn't give you all the coordinates. Book of Yahshua, chapter 80, verses 60 and 61 will get us what we need. Book of Yahshua, chapter 80, verses 60 and 61. And it says, and the children of Israel delayed going forth at night when the Egyptians came to them to bring them out. They said to them, are we thieves that we should go forth at night? And the children of Israel asked of the Egyptians vessels of silver and vessels of gold and garments, and the children of Israel stripped the Egyptians. So the Egyptians came to the children of Israel. What happened during this night of Passover? What happened? The death angel came through, firstborn all over. It says there was not a house where there was not one dead. So there were people mourning and going crazy. They said, listen, get them out of here. Pharaoh called for Moshe and Aaron. Moshe and Aaron went out to him, and they said, go. Go. It's nighttime. They said, go. But the children of Israel said, Why would they say no? We're not leaving right now. Moshe told them, don't come out. Don't come out. Do not come out. So they did not come out. They did not come out. It says the children of Israel delayed going forth at night when the Egyptians came to bring them out. So the Egyptians went to them and was like, y'all good, y'all can go. Y'all good, come on, leave, please. People dying all over the place, please go. And they said, no. Are we thieves that we should come out at night? Are we thieves that we should come out at night? Hold on to that. Are we thieves that we should come out at night? All right, so let's go back over. Let's go back over to the scriptures. Let's keep that context that we have from the book of Jasher. And let's see. I'm going to do this because I think I might have to stop before I get to this. So I want to make sure we have this in there. But I'm going to have to go back and put it in context for you later. So Matthew chapter 26. We're going to kind of stop. I'm going to have to come back. But we'll get this. So Matthew chapter 26. We're back to the time of Yahshua because we're going to track this timeline. We're going to get back into it. But let's go to verse 55. I want to point this out, and then I will skip back. Chapter 26, verse 65. 55, sorry, 55. Yeah. Now look at this. Why did the children of Israel, what did they say to them in Mitzrayim? They say, you come to get us at night. Should we go out at night like we're thieves? Now look at what Yahshua says. Matthew chapter 26, verse 55. In that hour, Yahshua said to the crowds. Now, because we didn't do this in order, note that it is after they've eaten the Pesach. They are in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it is pitch black dark. It's dark. And so now I'll continue. In that hour, that dark hour, Yahshua said to the crowds, have you come out as against a robber? Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to arrest me? Daily I sat with you teaching in the set apart place, and you did not seize me. But all this came to be so that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. So this was them coming to Yahshua and taking him as a thief at night. They were not to go. And they said, you coming to take us like we thieves. But then Yahshua comes back and he says, you have come out against me like a thief. Like I'm a robber. Tell me he's not the Passover. Tell me this is not the Passover. This is something new. Like this is something new. All right, so let's flip back. I wanted to make sure we got that in before I got to the stopping point, because I think after we do this Ezekiel, we're going to pause. So let's now go to, that gives us the account. Now we can go to, matter of fact, let's do that. Let's do that really quickly. We'll do Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5. I believe it's verse 5. Yes. And we see this is where the command, this is a part of the giving of that command. In the first new moon, on the 14th day of the new moon, between the evenings, or in the midst of the Erev, in the midst of the evening, is the Passover, is the Pesach. And on the 15th day is the new moon. In the 15th day of this new moon is the festival of Matzot. So 7 days you eat unleavened bread. We've already established that we eat 7 days starting on the 15th, but we've already eaten unleavened bread also on the 14th, according to Leviticus, right? And so that gives us a total of 8 days. A total of 8 days, not just 7. Passover and unleavened bread are not one and the same. They are, in fact, separated. Children of Israel did not come out in the self-same day of that evening of eating Passover meal. Why? Because he says, don't even leave your dwelling place. Don't even leave your dwelling place, okay? So now let's go to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 45. And what we're doing here is now we are looking at a time when the Passover is being kept after it was commanded, okay? And the reason that's important is because in Exodus chapter 12, the original historical account is not necessarily giving us our commanded instructions. It gives us a few commanded instructions, but it does not give us all of our commanded. It says here or there when to do it, what to eat with it, those sorts of things. But are we to put the blood of that lamb and dip with hyssop and put that on the doorpost of our houses? No. Are we to eat with our loins girded and our sandals laced? No. Those are not things that's commanded to do outside of what Moshe was commanding them to do. Are we commanded to stay in our dwelling places? No. Are we commanded not to leave any until morning? I'll just say but not in the same context, definitely, because we haven't even slaughtered it. So if you haven't slaughtered it, then you definitely are not being told to not leave any until morning. So now Ezekiel is going to give us a good idea of how it was being kept now for hundreds of years. Hundreds and hundreds of years. All right? So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 45, verse 18 through 25. So verse 18 is where we will begin reading. And it says, "Thus said the Master Yahweh." Who's speaking? The Master Yahweh. "In the first month, on the first of the new moon, you are to take a young bull on the first day, the first yom of the new moon. You are to take a young bull, a perfect one, and shall cleanse the set apart place." So the first instruction is to clean the set apart place. "And the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the doorpost of the house, on the four corners of the ledge of the set apart place, and on the post of the gate of the inner courtyard." Verse 20, "And do the same on the seventh day, the seventh yom of that new moon, for anyone who makes a mistake or is foolish, and you shall make atonement for the house." So there is this cleansing that's taking place, a cleansing that's taking place. Now, verse 21, "In the first month, on the 14th day of the new moon, you have" what? "The Pesach. A festival of 7 days, unleavened bread is eaten." A festival, unleavened bread. Now, the way this lays out, one can look at it and assume, well, Passover is included in that 7 days. We're going to keep reading. And it says, "And on the day the prince shall prepare for himself and for all the people of the land a bull for a sin offering." Verse 23, "And during the 7 days of the festival, he prepares an ascending offering to Yahweh, 7 bulls, 7 rams, perfect ones daily for 7 days, and a male goat daily for a sin offering." All right? These are, did y'all hear anything about a lamb or Passover lamb in there? 7 bulls, 7 rams, perfect ones for 7 days. Doesn't say anything about a Passover lamb. All right? So, verse 24, "And he prepares a grain offering of 1 ephah for each bull, and 1 ephah for each ram, together with a hin of oil for each ephah." Verse 25, "In the 7th month, on the 15th day," which day? On the 15th day of the new moon, "at the festival, he prepares like these 7 days, as a sin offering and an ascending offering, as the grain offering and as the oil." These 7 days begin when? The 15th day. At the festival, the 15th day. Now, go back to where it said Passover running into a festival of 7 days. These are two separate things. Verse 21. It says, and in the first new moon, on the 14th day of the new moon, you have Pesach. You can put a period right there. On the 14th day, you have Pesach, period. Next thought, as well as a festival of 7 days, which starts when? On the 15th day. 8 total days. We can't get away from that. 8 total days. And so I'm going to pause there. And next time we're going to come back to Yahshua's timeline and finish out. Now, because what I wanted to do is establish. We began the timeline. We started at 6 days until Passover. We saw 2 days. And we saw the day that the Passover was slaughtered. We saw a mixture of speaking between Passover and the festival, just like we see in Ezekiel, as a matter of fact. So understand, and I'm gonna throw this little piece out here, and then we'll close it out and open it up for any comments or questions or remarks. Note that things that you do for a very long time typically tend to develop jargon, tradition, practices, so you begin to say things like, for instance, let's say, for example, what's a time where we go away? We typically go away for an extended period of time. What? For Sukkot, right? We typically go away for Sukkot every year, right? That's the standard practice. So when you get off of work, let's just say Sukkot starts on a Monday, right? And you get off of work on Friday. You can say, I'm headed to Sukkot. Does that mean that you're going to leave Friday? No. But there's preparation. There's things that you're going to do. So some of this, when they're speaking and saying the Passover is near, or he went to go to keep the Passover, lumping it all together is not foreign. It's just that sometimes we get so deep where we begin to parse apart the wrong things and new doctrines get created. New practices get created. And so the example that we're given is based in Torah, right? Yahshua is keeping Passover in accordance with Torah. So we should be able to go to Torah and line everything up. So if he says the 14th day at evening, and we see that Yahshua says to them, he calls it Passover. He says we're going to eat the Passover. And then they say it was on the first day of unleavened bread that they slaughtered. Does that mean that the slaughtering takes place on the 15th day because he said on the first day of unleavened bread? No. That simply means he's using a generality in speech by saying the time of unleavened bread, which includes Passover and the other 7 days, the whole time frame. And so, but again, we're going to go back and we're going to then line up everything going all the way to the steak. And then I think I might have enough time in one teaching next time to take us from the steak all the way to him rising as well. If I can't, then we might split it up again, but we'll get through the whole thing. But I want you to see that the Torah established it, and Yahshua kept it. He followed it because it was a reflection of him. Even though it came first, quote unquote, right? In the timeline of things, it came first in history. But it was a reflection of him. And at the end of the day, he is our Passover. He is our Passover offering. And this was his offering to us, his people. Amen. 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 Amen.